okay, boy, you're safe now. And the puppy remembered. He remembered every pat on the head, every whispered promise. Every tear the man had shed when he realized he could no longer keep a pet in the apartment whose rent had just doubled. He remembered the final hug before returning him a word that tasted like betrayal and the emptiness that followed. Now, years later, their eyes met across cold metal and concrete, and the flicker of hope surged anew, only to be shadowed by the question neither dared to speak: what has become of us since we last met? The shelter's hush deepened as onlookers sensed the gravity of the reunion. Volunteers paused in their tasks. Staff exchanged glances thick with empathy. It was as if the building itself held its breath. For the puppy and the man, the world beyond these walls ceased to exist. In that moment, they were bound by a connection that transcended time, circumstance, and even the unkind separation that had defined their shared history. Yet something lingered at the edge of the man's gaze, an unspoken sorrow that tempered his joy, though he longed to reach through the bars, to scoop the puppy into his arms once more. His shoulders sagged under the weight of unspoken responsibilities. He traced the outline of the pup's muzzle with his eyes, committing every detail to memory: the small white patch on his chest, the slight quiver of his whiskers, the way his coat caught the light. But as the puppy whimpered and pressed against the barrier, the man's jaw clenched. He looked away, swallowing hard, as if steeling himself against a pain that threatened to overtake him. Silence returned to the shelter, carrying with it the promise of reunion and the tremor of something darker. The man's reasons for leaving, once rationalized as necessity, now felt like hollow excuses in the gaze of the creature who had trusted him implicitly. And the puppy, torn between elation and confusion, tilted his head, sensing that this encounter carried more than just the thrill of recognition. It bore the weight of loss, of questions unanswered, of a bond stretched across the chasm of impossible choices. In the hush, a single resolution formed between them: neither would turn away. Whatever lay ahead, whatever truth the man harbored, or decision he must make, the puppy would stand by his side, waiting for the hand that had saved him once before. And the man, despite the ache in his chest, would face the consequences of their reunion, no matter how painful. In a lonely shelter, a reunited duo teeters between hope and heartbreak, each recognizing the other's scars and both bracing for the choice that will determine their future. A thin shaft of dawnlight slanted across the cramped apartment as he fastened the last button of his worn coat. His reflection in the mirror, a man once brimming with confidence, now looked hollowed by months of restless nights and endless worry. His breath caught as he pinned a faded photograph of a German shepherd puppy to the lapel. The image creased and frayed at the edges. He stared at it for a moment, feeling the familiar warmth of that day pulse in his chest. Then, with a quiet resolve, he slipped the photo into his pocket and stepped out into the chill of early morning, each footstep echoing the promise he had made to come back, no matter the cost. On the ride to the airport, the city blurred past in streaks of neon and asphalt. He rehearsed the words he would say, over and over: "I've come back for you." Yet each repetition felt inadequate, as if no string of syllables could bridge the gap that had grown between them. In his mind's eye, he saw the puppy trembling under the park bench, the same bench where he knelt and extended a trembling hand. He remembered the animal's muzzle brushing his palm in cautious trust, the anxious whine that turned into a tentative wag. That moment had lit a spark of hope in both their hearts, a hope that, despite everything, had never truly died. But life had its own designs. When his landlord delivered the eviction notice, the words seemed to mock his loyalty to a creature he loved more than his own comfort. He had searched for alternative housing, scraped together savings, and begged friends for help. Yet each time, the cost of living rose faster than his salary abroad, forcing him into a corner of impossible choices. He swallowed his guilt and returned the puppy to the shelter, promising a reunion once he was settled. At the time, it had seemed the rational thing to do. Now, in the gathering light, it felt like a betrayal he vowed to atone for. On the long flight overseas, he clutched the photograph through turbulence and refilled coffee cups. He imagined the puppy's growth, his sturdy legs, sleek coat. Curious eyes, and scolded himself for every day he had missed. The first meal, shared in a warm kitchen, the midnight cuddle for warmth, the quiet companionship when loneliness gnawed at his spirit. He pictured the shelter staff caring for him, offering comfort with gentle hands and soft words. Deep down, he feared the puppy had forgotten him, but he needed to believe that the bond they forged could survive time and distance. As the plane touched down, his phone buzzed relentlessly. The messages were routine updates from his employer abroad, new assignments, revised schedules. He ignored them, stepping through the terminal with determination outweighing fatigue. Each passing announcement gate, 12, baggage claims seemed to echo the puppy's earlier cries for recognition. He had learned that hope could be both sustenance and burden, and now he carried it like a fragile ember against the cold weight of possibility. Outside the shelter, the pavement was slick with last night's rain. He paused at the entrance, inhaling, the crisp air tinged with antiseptic and damp concrete. His heart pounded as he touched the metal bar of the gate, tracing its ridges like the grooves on the photo in his pocket. The sign above the door read City Animal Rescue, each letter a reminder of the life he had altered. He pressed his palm against the wall, closing his eyes to summon the courage he had summoned when he first rescued that trembling puppy. In that instant, he felt both predator and protector. Predator, for the guilt that hunted him. Protector, for the vow he intended to keep. Inside, the shelter was a microcosm of hope and heartbreak. Volunteers moved with quiet purpose, cleaning cages, recording data, whispering comforting words to anxious animals. He paused to watch a tabby cat stretch luxuriously in a sunbeam, the mundane peace of the moment sharpening his awareness of his mission. When he asked a volunteer for the kennel number, his voice wavered, betraying the weight of months spent suppressing emotion. She met his gaze with gentle compassion and led him down the corridor, past rows of barking and howling, until they stood before a blue metal door. Silence settled over him as the volunteer unlocked the latch and stepped aside. The man's breath hitched when he saw the puppy no longer the fragile stray, but a confident young dog with alert ears and bright eyes. His coat, now glossy and well-groomed, rippled as he stood at attention. Recognition dawned slowly, the tilt of the head, the subtle lift of the lip in a half-smile, the quiver of the tail pressing against the floor. In that heartbeat, every barrier between past and present dissolved. Yet the man's heart constricted, as he realized how much had changed and how much remained beyond his control. He crouched low, extending a trembling hand through the bars. The puppy's nostrils flared as he took in the familiar scent. Leather boots, worn denim, a hint of cologne mixed with the temps of the city. The dog's body trembled as he leaned forward, pressing his snout against the man's palm. Memories flooded them both, the frightened whimper under the park bench, the rush to the shelter van, the whispered lullaby of reassurance in the night. Tears stung the man's eyes as he whispered, "I'm here, I promised." The puppy's eyes glistened, reflecting the raw ache of months apart. Around them, the shelter continued its steady rhythm, footsteps, distant barks, the soft murmur of voices. But for the man and the puppy, time had contracted to this single moment of reconnection. He traced the ridges of the puppy's muzzle, committing every contour to memory. Yet beneath the joy lay a current of fear, fear that his circumstances had shifted irreversibly, fear that the shelter's walls might stand between them once more. He closed his eyes, anchoring himself to the present, vowing silently that he would find a way to bring the puppy home. The volunteer stood respectfully to the side, giving them space while her eyes glistened with understanding. She knew the story that brought him back, the story of a man who cherished his dog but had been driven away by forces beyond his control. She had seen countless reunions, but each carried its own weight of sacrifice and devotion. Today's would be no different, a testament to love's enduring power, and its capacity to demand the ultimate repayment. For a moment, the man allowed himself to imagine a different path, walking out of the shelter together, the puppy bounding at his side as they slipped into the sunrise. He pictured the laughter they would share, the silent companionship in solitude, the quiet victories of everyday life. But as his hand lay upon the puppy's soft fur, he felt the stirrings of inevitable truths, the truths he would have to confess, the decisions he would need to make if he could not yet offer the stable home the puppy deserved. He inhaled deeply, steeling himself. Whatever came next, he knew their bond would guide him. The puppy, with all his loyalty and unspoken affection, deserved nothing less than the man's unwavering commitment. And so, with a final soft murmur of promise, "I'll figure this out, I swear," he rose to his feet, resolved to confront the obstacles standing between them, drawn back by an unbreakable bond. He faces the weight of past choices and the uncertainty ahead, determined to rewrite their story together. The moment stretched into an eternity as the puppy's amber eyes locked onto the man's. Time fractured into shards of memory, the frosty evening in the city park, the tremor in the puppy's whine as he'd cowered beneath the iron bench, the man's own heartbeat pounding like a drum in his ears, the shelter's sterile scent, the hum of overhead lights, Even the distant echo of barking all of it fell away. In their place rose the primal bond that had formed in that first desperate rescue. A bond neither time nor distance could fully erase. The puppy shifted forward on unsteady legs, pressing his nose against the cold steel bars. Each careful inhale drew in the scent he had carried with him through months of waiting, worn denim, the faint musk of human warmth, and something else, hope. His tail, previously still intense, fluttered in an awkward rhythm, as if rediscovering an old dance. He let out a low, quivering whimper that rose in pitch until it became a ragged sob. The sound charging the air with raw, unfiltered emotion. Tears welled at the corners of his eyes, glistening like dew on fur, threatening to spill down his muzzle. For the man, the puppy's reaction tore open every scar he had tried to bury. He dropped to one knee, fingertips brushing against the bars, as though hoping his touch could transcend metal and cement. He remembered the puppy's first tentative steps toward him on that long-ago night. The gentle pressure of cold paws against his palm, the way the little creature had pressed himself into the warmth of the man's coat. He'd whispered, soothing words then, "I've got you now," he'd said, and he spoke them again now, voice thick with unshed tears. "I've got you, boy. I've come back." The puppy's whine flattened into a series of short, urgent cries. His head tilted as if he could not fully believe the man before him was real. He sank to his haunches, eyes never leaving the man's face, and allowed himself to shudder with relief. Each tear that escaped his eye track read like a sentence in a story of abandonment and longing. Of nights spent cold and alone, of the brief, shining warmth of companionship now rekindled. He pressed his forehead to the bars, as though willing the barrier to dissolve, to reunite flesh and spirit in a single heartbeat in the man's mind. Memories flickered like an old film reel running backward. He saw the puppy at his feet during late-night study sessions, tilting his head in confusion at the drone of lectures. He felt the lean of the dog's body against his leg when anxiety tightened his chest, the soft nudge of a wet nose demanding attention. He recalled the joy of teaching the puppy to fetch, how the dog's gait had grown sure and powerful after weeks of patient guidance. And then, the moment of crushing guilt, eviction notice in hand. The man's trembling voice as he gently led the puppy back to these very shelters, promising a swift reunion that life had delayed indefinitely. He blinked, forcing himself back into the present. The scent of antiseptic and the drone of distant footsteps reminded him they stood inside a crowded facility, not a private sanctuary. Volunteers paused in their tasks, their eyes bright with understanding as they witnessed this charged reunion. Some reached for tissues, others stepped quietly away to give the pair space. The man drew in a ragged breath, the pulsating ache in his chest matching the rhythm of the puppy's continued whimpers. He pressed both hands to the bars, fingertips splayed as if tracing the outline of the dog's soul. "Do you remember me?" he whispered, voice cracking. The puppy's response was a stifled sob that pressed through the bars like a prayer. He lifted one paw, placing it atop the man's hand, as though sealing their pact again. The man closed his eyes, letting the warmth of that touch flood through him, an electric pulse of forgiveness and longing. He opened his eyes to meet the puppy's, seeing not just a reflection of his own sorrow but a shared determination to reclaim what had been lost. A distant alarm began to chime, announcing an incoming rescue van, but neither of them registered the interruption. Their universe had contracted to this one cell of metal and emotion. The man allowed himself to imagine the world beyond, fresh air rushing past as they ran through a park, the puppy's tongue lolling in joy. The comfort of a shared bed in a tiny apartment, the quiet contentment of evening routines uninterrupted by uncertainty. But reality intruded. He would need to explain his absence, to plead his case with shelter staff, and, most agonizingly, to confront whether his current situation was truly fit for responsibility. As if sensing his hesitation, the puppy leaned stubbornly into the bars, his body trembling with both hope and fear. The man's hands tightened around the cold steel. He swallowed hard, forcing the words past the lump in his throat. "I'm sorry I left you. I thought I was doing the right thing, but every day away from you has been my punishment." His voice dropped to a mere breath. "I never stopped loving you." The puppy's tail thumped softly against the floor, a hesitant echo of his former exuberance. He lowered his head, pressing his nose into the man's palm, and exhaled a long, low sigh, an unspoken affirmation that despite the pain of separation, forgiveness was possible. The man closed his eyes, tears escaping down his cheeks, unchecked, blotting his collar. He felt the puppy's warm breath dust against his fingers, felt the steadying weight of his paw. In that instant, he understood that their bond was not measured by time spent together, but by the depth of devotion that neither circumstance nor distance could extinguish. Somewhere in the shelter, a door clanged shut, jolting him back to the precariousness of the moment. He opened his eyes to find the puppy gazing at him with solemn understanding. The dog's erect ears quivered, alert to the man's unspoken turmoil. In that gaze lay an invitation to stand by each other through whatever came next, to face the uncertainty, hand in paw. The man nodded, swallowing a hollow lump of fear. He drew his hand back slowly, as though lifting a treasure from a shrine, and stroked the puppy's head through the bars. Feeling the sleek, resilient fur beneath his palm, tears still glistening on his cheeks, the man whispered one final promise. "I'll bring you home, I swear it." The puppy responded with a soft, hopeful whine that resonated through his very bones. For the first time in months, the man dared to believe that their story had a future beyond these walls. Around them, the shelter resumed its cadence. Footsteps, the far-off bark of another dog, yet neither the man nor the puppy moved. They remained locked in a moment of pure recognition, their past sorrows and fleeting joys converging into a single warning and reassurance. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Recognition rekindles their shared past and irrevocably binds them anew. Even as the weight of tomorrow's choices looms large, sunlight streamed through the shelter's high windows, casting golden rectangles across the concrete floor as the man and the German Shepherd puppy remained locked in their embrace of gazes. After the raw intensity of recognition and tears, the world seemed to exhale, allowing them a brief reprieve in which joy could blossom. The puppy, emboldened by the man's steady presence, rose to his paws and pressed his head against the bars, once more, this time with an eagerness that spoke of boundless optimism rather than forlorn longing. The man lowered his hand to scratch behind the dog's ears, marveling at how the once skinny stray had filled out into a sleek, muscular adolescent. His coat gleamed, the deep sable and russet tones catching the light like polished mahogany, and his eyes shone with a vitality that affirmed life's generosity. The puppy responded in kind. He barked softly, a tentative sound that grew into a confident chorus of joyous yelps. Each bark reverberated through the shelter corridor, prompting nearby volunteers to pause in their tasks and look toward the kennel with warm smiles. Some stepped forward, drawn by the infectious happiness emanating from the reunited pair, while others retreated respectfully to give them space. But even as bustle resumed around them, footsteps, distant meows, the clink of leashes, the man and the puppy inhabited a bubble of their own making, one filled with echoes of happier times and unspoken promises. He crouched low again, extending both hands through the bars to cradle the dog's head. The puppy nuzzled in, his muzzle brushing the man's knuckles as if tasting the truth of his presence. Memories unfurled in the man's mind, teaching the puppy to sit with a handful of kibble. The triumphant wag of his tail when he mastered the command. The delight in his eyes as he chased a tennis ball across a sunlit yard. The tender warmth of his body pressed against the man's side on evenings when loneliness threatened to overwhelm. Those recollections now felt vivid and immediate, as though the missing months had been mere moments rather than an expanse of isolation for both of them. Volunteers approached quietly with brushes and towels, offering to freshen the puppy's coat before the man officially signed the adoption papers. The man accepted gratefully, guiding the dog's head gently into their care. As the soft bristles raked through sleek fur, the puppy stood patiently, ears flicking at each tender stroke. The brush uncovered the vibrant undercoat that had been hidden by dust and grime when he first arrived. Each pass revealed a deeper luster, a testament to the shelter's diligent care and the puppy's own resilience. The man's heart swelled at the sight, nourished by pride and relief. When the brushing concluded, the man rewarded the puppy with a treat, a chunk of lean chicken held between his thumb and forefinger. The puppy snapped it up with the precision of a seasoned performer, tail wagging in kinetic celebration. The man laughed, a rich, unguarded sound that seemed to lift the very air around them. He murmured, "You remember that, don't you?" As the dog licked his fingers clean, the sentiment felt almost absurd. How could any dog forget the taste of chicken? Yet, in that moment, it symbolized so much more. The simple joys they had shared, the rituals that had forged their bond. A volunteer snapped a photograph, capturing the moment of reunion. The dog's joyful stance, head cocked in a classic German Shepherd tilt, and the man's luminous smile, eyes crinkled at the corners. The photo would find its way onto the shelter's social media page later that day, an emblem of hope and the power of enduring connection. But for now, it existed only in their private memory. a still frame in the larger reel of renewed possibility. Encouraged by his handler, the puppy began to perform familiar drills. Sit, stay, paw, spin. Each command he executed with bright focus, as though demonstrating his continued loyalty and willingness to serve at the man's side. The man whispered encouragements, "Good boy, yes, you're amazing," his voice catching occasionally as emotion pooled beneath each syllable. He watched the puppy spring through the motions, the fluid extension of his limbs, the poised tilt of his head, the graceful return to heel. It was as though they had never been apart. The synergy between them felt preordained, as inevitable. As sunrise, volunteers and staff gathered to witness the display. Some wiped away tears. Others exchanged nods that communicated shared admiration. A senior staff member approached, clipboard in hand, to confirm the adoption paperwork was in order. The man's signature flowed across the page, each stroke affirming his commitment to this dog who had claimed his heart from the first trembling whine. When the final line was penned, the staff member proclaimed, "He's all yours." The words landed like a benediction. The man unlatched the kennel door and stepped inside, crouching to meet the puppy eye to eye. He wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, drawing him close in a full embrace. The puppy responded with joyous wriggles, moist nose pressing into the man's collar, paws dancing against his shoulders. For a moment, they existed outside of Tima Man and his dog reunited at last. The world beyond the shelter's walls reduced to insignificance, but as the warmth of that embrace lingered, an undercurrent of unease threaded through the man's heart. He could not ignore the swirl of responsibility that accompanied the exhilaration of reunion. The looming logistics of housing, finances, and time. His work abroad had provided for him, but he had no income in this country. His friends existed, in scattered cities, none equipped to accommodate him with his dog. He had signed the paperwork without a fully formed plan, buoyed by the emotional high of the moment. Now, as the reality of his circumstances reasserted itself, a quiet dread began to seep into his consciousness. The puppy, oblivious to these concerns, bounded toward the exit ramp, tail waving like a banner. He pressed his shoulder against the man's side, eyebrows raised in a question that required no translation. "Where are we going?" The man laughed softly, looping his arm through the dog's collar. "Let's find out," he replied, voice pitched with optimism he did not entirely feel. They passed through the reception area, where the photograph of their reunion now adorned the bulletin board. Beneath it, a note read, "Congratulations to Max and his hero for finding each other again." The man paused, tracing the printed image with his fingertip. The puppy nudged him forward, eager to explore, so he moved one tentative step at a time toward the shelter exit. Toward an uncertain future gilded by hope. Outside, the world greeted them with a blast of afternoon sun and the scent of city traffic. Horns honked in the distance. Laughter drifted from a nearby park. The man inhaled deeply, grounding himself in the present. He knelt, unhooked the leash, and fastened the puppy's harness with practiced fingers. The dog pranced in place, alert to every passing pedestrian, every fluttering leaf. The man clipped the harness to the leash and stood. He met the puppy's gaze. In that look, he saw boundless trust and unquestioning loyalty. They stepped onto the sidewalk together. Man and dog embarking on a journey neither could predict but both were determined to face. With every step, the puppy's pace punctuated the man's resolve. They would navigate the challenges ahead side by side. Joy had reunited them. Now responsibility beckoned with equal force. Yet, as they passed beneath the shelter's shadow and into the busy street beyond, neither dared to doubt the truth illuminated by today's reunion. Together, they were home. Joy floods their reunion as they rediscover routines of love and loyalty. But the boundless optimism of today clashes with the looming challenges of tomorrow, testing the strength of a bond reborn. The afternoon sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the shelter's gravel courtyard as the man and the German shepherd whom he'd quietly begun calling Max paused before the administrative office. The earlier thrill of brushing Max's coat and signing the adoption papers now seemed to hang on fragile threads. The man's breath caught as he watched Max circle the small concrete pad, tail wagging but eyes wary of the building whose walls held both salvation and judgment. He squared his shoulders and followed the shelter director inside, determined to confirm what he already feared, that love alone might not be enough to secure a permanent home. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paperwork and stale coffee. The director, a woman whose gentle eyes belied a steely professionalism, greeted him with a sympathetic nod. "We're thrilled you want to adopt Max," she began, her tone measured. She tapped a pen against a thick file folder. "But before we finalize everything, we need to review your housing and employment documentation." The words landed like stones in the man's chest. He swallowed, forced a nod. In his mind, a storm of justifications raced through his thoughts. "I'll find an apartment. I can work remotely. I just need time." Yet each thought felt inadequate. As though the winds of reality would blow them away before they could take root. The director's gaze softened at his hesitation. "I understand your situation is complicated," she said quietly. "Many people who've adopted face challenges. But our policy requires proof of stable housing, a lease agreement, or a letter from your landlord confirming pets are allowed. Without that, we can't proceed with the adoption." She paused, letting the weight of that requirement settle between them. The man's mind darted to his old apartment, the cramped studio whose rent he'd once managed, whose notice he'd surrendered when he fled overseas for work. That place no longer existed, and he had nothing to show for it. No lease, no cosigner. Not even a friend's couch, secured beyond next week. He closed his eyes, recalling the eviction notice pinned to his door the day he'd left, stark black, letters announcing the end of his tenure, the termination of his right to shelter. The memory felt like a physical blow. He'd believed that by returning to the shelter with what he thought was good news, his arrival and commitment, he could erase that moment. But the notice, crisp and cruel, had defined his fate as irrevocably as the bonds that now tied him to Max. He pressed his hand to his forehead, fingertips grazing the creased photograph in his pocket, and forced himself to meet the director's eyes. I don't have a lease," he admitted, voice hoarse. "I've been staying with friends, moving every few weeks. I thought if I could get Max back, I could figure out the rest." Each word shook with raw urgency. On the table before him lay blank forms, adoption agreements waiting to be stamped approved. But approval hinged on documents he didn't have. The room seemed to shrink as the director's expression grew pained. "There are foster opportunities," she offered softly. "You could foster Max until you secure permanent housing. He'd remain legally under our care, but you'd have all the responsibilities and all the joys of living with him day to day." The man's chest tightened. "Foster," he echoed, tasting the word's bitter undertones. In that arrangement, Max might bond more deeply with a different family. If his foster turned adoptive parent, his stomach turned at the thought of another human stepping into his place in Max's life. He clenched his fists beneath the table, knuckles whitening. "I don't want to just foster him," he said, eyes burning. "I want him home, my home." His voice cracked on the last word, laden with sorrow and He pictured Max curled at his feet beside a crackling fire, sharing quiet mornings and long walk scenes that now felt as impossible as breathing underwater. The director's face betrayed sympathy laced with regret. "I know you love him," she said. "But our priority is the dog's well-being. Stability, consistency, those aren't just buzzwords. They're critical for a young German Shepherd's development. Without a reliable home environment, Max could experience stress or anxiety. We have to consider his best interests." She offered him a folder of local resources, affordable housing listings, pet-friendly shelters, counseling services. Each page felt like a barrier between his intention and its fulfillment. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the linoleum floor. The sound echoed in the small office, punctuating his frustration. "I'll find something," he said, voice low. "Just give me 1 week." His words bore the weight of a desperate plea, but they felt feeble, like shouting against a storm. The director shook her head gently. "We can extend your foster application, but we can't guarantee adoption without documentation. You need to present proof before we can change his status to yours." Defeated, he sank back into the chair. Max stood at the door, ears pricked, head cocked to one side. The puppy sense of empathy shone in his eyes as he looked to the man for guidance. The man's chest tightened at the sight. The unwavering trust in Max's gaze, the implicit question, "What now?" He reached into his pocket and produced the creased photograph, the only tangible fragment of the life they once shared. He laid it on the table, edges curling with wear. "This is all I have to prove I care," he murmured, voice barely audible. The director's tender frown deepened. "I wish we could do more," she said, reaching across to gently close the file folder. "We'll keep in touch. And if you can gather the necessary documents, we'll finalize your adoption immediately." She stood, offering a business card with her direct line. "Call me." I want Max to have his forever home and I believe that with a little time, you can make that happen. The man nodded, swallowing a lump in his throat. He rose unsteadily, and the director ushered him toward the door as he tucked the card into his pocket. Outside, the early evening sky glowed a bruised purple. The courtyard was empty now, the bustle of volunteers long gone. Max pressed close to the man's side, warmth seeping through the leash into his fingers. The man removed his hand and patted Max's head, trying to summon a smile for his companion's sake. It'll be okay, he whispered, more to himself than to Max. He glanced at the photograph peeking from his pocket and felt the ache of inadequacy twist in his gut. As they walked away from the shelter gates, every step felt heavy with uncertainty. The city streets held no promise of housing or stability. They offered only the echo of possibilities, slipping through his fingers. In his mind, questions swirled like autumn leaves caught in a gust. Where would he live? What sort of roof could he provide? Could he keep a job abroad while caring for a dog here? Each question found no answer but spurred a growing sense of desperation. That night, he and Max shared a quiet dinner in a friend's tiny kitchen, dog kibble for Max, cold leftovers for himself. The overhead light flickered as the man ran a hand through his hair, forcing himself to face the truth. Love could open doors, but it could not rewrite his past or erase the barriers of paperwork and leases. Max nudged his hand, offering silent solidarity. The man looked down at the dog's eager eyes and felt fresh resolve ignite within him. He would scour every listing, plead every case, marshal every resource at his disposal. Because Max had given him 2 chances at hope. Once when he was rescued, again today when those amber eyes welled with recognition. He owed the dog nothing less than his unwavering effort. Late that night, he lay awake on a friend's futon, Max curled protectively at his feet. In the darkness, the puppy's soft breathing echoed the rhythm of the man's own heart. Each exhale carried the weight of his guilt. Each inhale steeled him for the fight ahead. He rose, sat at the edge of the mattress, and scribbled a list. Call housing offices, gather references, set up mail forwarding, prepare an emergency fund. Beneath the scratch of pen on paper, he felt the first stirrings of a plan solidifying. He slid the photograph across the coffee table, tracing its worn edges in the faint lamplight. We'll make it, he whispered to Max, words as much a promise to himself as to his dog. And in that quiet vow, he found a flicker of peace amid the sorrow of discovery. Because though his path to adoption now faced hurdles he had not foreseen, the core truth remained unshaken. He and Max were bound by a love that refused to be undone by leases, policies, or fractured pasts. Together, they would chase a future where 2 souls, 1 man, 1 dog could finally call a place home. Before we move on, we'd love to hear from you. What's an animal-inspired moment that changed your life? Share your story in the comments below. The joy of reunion collides with harsh reality as the man confronts bureaucratic barriers. Yet his resolve and Max's loyalty ignites a fragile hope for a future they must now fight to secure. The man sat on the edge of the narrow futon in his friend's sparsely furnished living room. Max curled at his feet, as though sensing the turmoil roiling beneath his calm exterior. The overhead bulb cast harsh shadows, turning every crease in the man's brow into a testament of sleepless nights. He stared at the pile of open housing applications on the coffee table, their edges curling like beaten flags of defeat. In each form, he had recounted his personal history, the job abroad that pulled him away, the eviction that drove him to return, the unwavering love he bore for the dog whose fate now hung in bureaucratic balance. Yet with every submission, the same gnawing thought sank deeper into his mind. Is my love enough? Max lifted his head, amber eyes reflecting the man's own uncertainty, and nudged his hand. The simple gesture carried a depth of empathy that no human could replicate, reminding him that their bond was both his greatest strength and the source of his deepest anguish. Inside the man's chest, guilt warred with determination. In the quiet hours before dawn, memories of that first rescue replayed like a looping film. Max, shivering beneath the bench as the man knelt, voice trembling with compassion, promising shelter and warmth. He recalled the weight of Max's lean body in his arms, the puppy's warm breath fogging the night air, and the surge of hope that had driven him to act. But he also remembered the day he left Max behind, the weight of an eviction notice in one hand and the leash in the other, the tight knot in his stomach as he whispered yet another promise. I'll be back soon, knowing it might ring. Hello. He had justified his choice as an act of responsibility, but now, faced with the prospect of permanent separation, he recognized the lie he had told himself. Love could not thrive on promises alone. It demanded action, stability, and sacrifice. Max's steady presence anchored the man in the present moment. Yet his mind drifted to the shelter director's words. Stability and consistency are critical for a young German shepherd's development. He saw Max's lithe form shifting in the narrow light, each muscle rippling beneath a coat that once bore the grime of neglect, now shining with resilience. The dog's unwavering trust had become both his salvation and his indictment. How could he offer Max the reliable home he deserved when his own life felt like a ship without an anchor? He closed his eyes, willing the answer to crystallize, but instead felt only the pounding of his heart and the rising tide of anxiety. That night, flashbacks invaded his dreams, blurring the line between past and present. He dreamed of Max alone, in a cold kennel, ears flattened, whimpering at the door as distant footsteps receded. He heard his own voice calling out through bars that felt impossibly thick. But the dog remained just out of reach, a silent figure trapped behind harsh metal. When he woke, sweat beaded on his forehead, and he found Max leaning over him, silent concern in his eyes. The dog lowered his head, letting the man rest against his side, offering warmth and solace in the face of unspoken dread. In those moments, the man realized that psychological trauma did not reside solely in humans. For Max, the instability and separation could carve wounds just as deep, shaping a psyche built on uncertainty. By dawn, the man had resolved to confront his fear of failure. He turned to the blank page of his laptop and began drafting a heartfelt letter to his former landlord, explaining his situation and requesting a pet addendum to his old lease. His fingers shook as he typed, each word a plea and an apology. He paused to watch Max pacing the small living room, ears flicking at every creak and draft of wind. The dog's cautious alertness underscored their shared vulnerability. Neither of them could predict the future, but they could face it together, fortified by a bond that transcended paperwork and addresses. Over the next week, every interaction carried a psychological weight for the man. He met with potential landlords, watching their eyes flick from Max's calm demeanor to the man's own expression, searching for signs of instability. He attended job interviews and whispered reassurances to Max during moments of doubt and internal monologues spoken only to his dog. He recited mantras of adequacy. I can do this. We can do this. His confidence wavered with each rejection. A landlord's door closed with a terse apology. A hiring manager's polite smile evaporated behind the words, "We've gone in a different direction." Yet each time the man returned to Max, the dog greeted him with unfailing joy, erasing self-doubt and reminding him of the stakes at hand. One evening, a social worker referred him to a transitional housing program for pet owners. The man sat in a sunlit office, Max lying at his feet, attentive to every murmur of conversation. The caseworker walked through the program's rules, lease duration, rent obligations, behavior agreements. The man signed forms, heart pounding as the pen scratched across official paper. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of stability taking shape. Though tempered by caution, the program's capacity was limited. Funding depended on volatile grants. Yet this tenuous opportunity ignited hope in both human and canine opportunity to build consistency into their daily rhythms, to transform psychological scars into stories of resilience. As they settled into the transitional apartment, modest studio with a small courtyard, the man observed Max's behavior with a keen sensitivity. The dog circled the perimeter, nose tracing patterns in the cracked concrete, eyes scanning for threats and landmarks. In past months, every new environment had brought fresh stressors, unknown floors that echoed unsettlingly, unfamiliar scents that triggered anxiety, hollow corridors haunted by distant echoes. But here, in this tentative home, Max sniffed at corners before reclining, his body relaxing as he recognized the pattern of safety. Each day he awoke to the same walls, the same doorway, the same view of sky from the window anchors that began to dissolve the trauma that had weighed on his spirit. For the man, witnessing Max's gradual ease stirred a well of emotions. He saw in the dog's soft eyes a reflection of his own longing for refuge. In shared silence, they processed the psychological journey they had undertaken, from crisis to crisis, from shelter to shelter, each bearing witness to separation and fear. Yet here, in this interlude of calm, they found the space to rebuild trust not only between themselves but within their own hearts. The man recognized that healing required more than physical shelter. It demanded emotional safety and the freedom to hope without reservation. Late one evening, the man wrote in his journal, another ritual forged from necessity and introspection. He described Max's tentative first steps across the courtyard. The way the dog's tail had lifted naturally for the first time in months. He recounted the subtle shift in his own mood, the easing of tension in his shoulders, the willingness to plan future walks in the nearby park. He paused and placed his pen on the page, acknowledging the fragile alchemy of environment and emotion. "We are more than our pasts," he wrote. "In this space, we learn to be ourselves again, full of hope, free of dread." Max patted over and nudged his hand, as if sealing the truth of that declaration with a canine affirmation. In the days that followed, the man prepared his final adoption documents: the transitional program's lease, a letter of support from the caseworker, proof of income from freelance projects. Each paper represented not only a bureaucratic step, but a conscious act of psychological reclamation, asserting stability where once there had been chaos. He laid the completed packet before the shelter director, feeling the weight in his chest shift from anxiety to anticipation. When the director stamped the adoption agreement approved, the man exhaled as though releasing a held breath. Max leaned against his leg, awareness shining in his eyes that this victory extended beyond legal ownership to the restoration of emotional safety. That night, as they settled into bed, the man felt a delicate serenity wash over him. He ran his hand along Max's side, reflecting on the emotional journey that had unfolded, the guilt that threatened to suffocate him, the flashbacks that haunted his dreams, the step-by-step rebuilding of trust and security. Max's rhythmic breathing mirrored his own, a testament to the bond that had carried them through turmoil. In the quiet darkness, the man whispered a final promise: "We'll never be apart again." And in that vow, he found the culmination of their journey through emotional and psychological depths, a beginning defined by mutual healing and steadfast hope. Facing inner guilt and PTSD-like flashbacks, he and Max navigate trauma and rebuild trust, forging emotional resilience that promises a future of unwavering companionship. The morning light slanted through the dusty window panes of the transitional apartment, illuminating floating motes of dust like drifting possibilities. The man stirred awake to find Max already pacing the narrow living room, ears pricked and tail sweeping in cautious optimism. Last night's official adoption approval had felt surreal, an almost impossible victory over the bureaucracy and past mistakes that had threatened to keep them apart forever. Yet as the man stretched and rose, he recognized that legal ownership was only the first step. The real challenge lay in forging a stable existence after months of upheaval. He slid on a pair of worn sneakers and watched Max settle into a tentative sit beside the door, as though both dog and man were poised on the brink of something new and fragile. Over coffee at the small fold-out table, the man pored over a community bulletin board online, searching for affordable training classes and dog-friendly events. He bookmarked a weekend agility course offered by a local rescue organization, an opportunity not only to strengthen Max's obedience, but also to integrate into a supportive network of fellow dog lovers. As he clicked through listings for discounted veterinary care and low-cost microchipping clinics, he felt the familiar stirrings of hope swirl within him. Here was a roadmap out of crisis, a sequence of practical steps that, taken one by one, could secure Max's well-being and soothe the man's lingering guilt. He tapped his fingertips against the table, picturing Max weaving through a course of jumps and tunnels, eyes bright with concentration and joy. Max, sensing the anticipation in the man's energy, rose and nudged the coffee mug with his wet nose. The man smiled, his heart softening at the dog's unwavering devotion. He imagined the agility class, not just as training, but as therapy, healing for Max's residual anxiety after confinement in kennels and shelters, and healing for his own battered confidence. In his mind, he replayed scenes from the past week's tentative first night in the apartment, where Max had circled 3 times before collapsing in exhaustion. The moment Max had greeted a passing neighbor with a friendly wag rather than defensive growl. The way Max's body relaxed on the foam mat as the man read aloud from a dog training manual. Each small victory crystallized into evidence that they were moving beyond survival toward flourishing. That afternoon, they ventured outside for their first official outing as a forever family. The man clipped a new harness around Max's chest, its bright blue fabric stark against his sable coat. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, the man's pulse quickened. He scanned the block for signs of danger, busy intersections, loose dogs, rattling garbage cans, but found none. Instead, he discovered toddlers pointing in wonder, joggers offering friendly nods, and an elderly woman kneeling to pat Max's head. With each encounter, the man felt his pride swell. Max's easy friendliness reflected back an image of them, both as worthy members of the community. Their destination was a nearby dog park, long fenced perimeter, scattered benches, and a row of shade trees where owners could chat while their dogs romped. As they approached, clusters of canines darted in and out of view, and a chorus of barks rose in greeting. The man's stomach fluttered with nerves. Would Max remember how to play politely after months of shelter confinement? Would other owners judge them for any missteps? He took a deep breath and opened the gate. Max bounded inside, tongue lolling, tail a pendulum of excitement. He halted at the threshold, scanning the expanse, then sprinted to greet a golden retriever, who welcomed him with a wagging tail and a cheerful nuzzle. The man exhaled, laughter bubbling from his lips as he watched Max romp with newfound freedom. Within minutes, Max had made friends across the park, sniffing noses, leaping over grass, and offering gentle playbows. The man remained at the margins, observing with a blend of pride and relief. Each playful interaction signified more than canine camaraderie. It represented the gradual reverse of trauma. Max was learning that the world was safe again, that joy could exist beyond the sterile walls of kennels and the sterile policies of shelters. The man felt his own anxieties ease as he chatted with other owners, exchanging tips on training and recommendations for pet-friendly housing. For the first time in months, he experienced the gentle uplift of community support rather than the isolating stress of bureaucracy. That evening, they returned home weary but content. Max collapsed onto his favorite rug, legs splayed in a blissful sprawl, while the man prepared a modest dinner. As he plated his food and poured a small bowl of kibble, he reflected on the day's arc, from the tentative promise of hope at dawn to the exuberant confidence Max displayed at the park. He realized that stability was woven through these everyday rituals: shared meals, evening walks, spontaneous moments of play. Each act reaffirmed their commitment to one another and to the life they were building together. Before bed, the man crouched beside Max's bed, brushing the dog's ears and whispering gratitude for every step they had taken. He placed a hand on Max's flank and closed his eyes, recalling the long nights of doubt, the shelter director's gentle yet firm demands, and the series of small risks that had culminated in today's triumphs. In the soft hush of the apartment, he acknowledged both the fragility and the potency of their glimmer of hope. They were still vulnerable to setbacks, financial crises, housing instability, the unpredictability of life, but they had proven that their bond could spark transformation. Together, they would face whatever came next, sustained by love and bolstered by the community that had begun to embrace them. From the first approved papers to Max's joyous romp at the dog park, small victories light their path forward, yet beneath every triumph lies the question: can hope endure beyond today? The city's autumn chill edged through the open window as the man sat at his small desk. Max curled at his feet in expectant stillness. A single lamp cast a warm pool of light over the scattered papers before him: the final copy of the adoption agreement, his lease with the transitional housing program, and a letter of employment confirming his freelance contract's extension, but none of it felt sufficient. Each document represented a thread tying him to a future with Max, yet the frayed ends of uncertainty still flapped in the evening breeze. He closed his eyes and let the hush of their small apartment settle around him, focusing on the steady rise and fall of Max's chest. "We've come this far," he whispered inside his own mind. But is this enough? In the faint lamplight, his memory replayed two pivotal moments side by side: the puppy's first frightened whimper beneath the park bench and the triumphant wag of his tail when they reunited at the shelter. One was the scar of abandonment, the other, the spark of redemption. He could feel the weight of those memories pressing on his shoulders, demanding a choice that would define both their lives. The adoption papers lay open, awaiting his signature. With each passing second, he felt the pull of responsibility tightened like a noose. If he signed, he guaranteed Max stability but risked overextending himself financially and emotionally. If he delayed, he preserved his own breathing room, but Max's future might slip back into limbo. The man's pulse quickened as he considered the practical risks. A freelance contract offered no guarantee beyond the next 3 months. The transitional program could end abruptly if funding dried up, and his savings already stretched thin would evaporate in a matter of weeks if emergencies arose. Yet beyond the ledger of costs and deadlines lay a more corrosive fear: the fear of failing Max again. He recalled the sting of guilt when he first handed the puppy back to the shelter. The heartbreak etched into every whine and whimper that followed him down the corridor. He could not bear to become the architect of another cruel separation, to inflict on Max the same emotional scars that had haunted his dreams. As night deepened, he rose and began to pace, each lap a silent dialogue between heart and mind. He pictured life without Max: empty mornings, silent evenings, the void where laughter and loyalty once lived. The man's chest tightened until every breath felt like a conscious effort. In the depths of his mind, a counterpoint formed visions of future strain, sleepless nights worrying over unpaid bills, tense days subduing his anxiety so Max would never sense his owner's instability. The gnawing dread of answering the phone, with news that the transitional program had been cancelled. Could he endure another upheaval? Or would he give Max the consistency he craved, even if it meant sacrificing his own peace of mind? At the window, Max lifted his head, amber eyes reflecting the lamp's glow. In that gaze, the man saw something unmistakable: unconditional trust. The dog's calm presence spoke of a loyalty that demanded only one thing in return: a commitment to stay. The man knelt and ran his fingers along Max's back, feeling each muscle ripple beneath his touch. He closed his eyes, letting the dog's steady warmth center him. In that moment, abstract fears dissolved, replaced by the simple truth of their bond. He breathed deeply, inhaling the scent of Max's furry, familiar, and irrevocably home, and let the memory of abandonment be eclipsed by the promise of steadfast companionship. His phone buzzed against the desk, yanking him from introspection. A message from the caseworker confirmed that the housing program had been extended for another 6 and conditional on his continued adherence to the lease terms. He exhaled, the tension in his chest loosening by a fraction. Hope glimmered enough to counterbalance the risks, if he allowed it. He typed back a quick note of gratitude and returned his gaze to the adoption agreement, pen poised above the signature line. His hand trembled slightly, but the uncertainty in his mind had fallen away, replaced by a quiet resolve. Flashbacks flitted at the edges of his consciousness. The shelter director's compassionate insistence on Max's welfare. The stack of resource pamphlets that had guided him through each bureaucratic hurdle. The hundreds of small victories culminating in this pivotal moment. Every step had refined his understanding of what true responsibility entailed, not mere possession, but the unwavering dedication to another being's emotional and physical well-being. He reflected on the nights Max had shivered in a new kennel, the afternoons he had cowered in unfamiliar rooms, and the exact moment when Max's trust in him had rekindled. Those memories formed a lodestar, guiding him toward a decision that honored both redemption and foresight. He lifted the pen and placed the tip against the line reserved for his signature. The lamp illuminated the ink in the dim space between them, the blank curve awaiting his mark. His breath slowed, each inhale steadying the tremor in his fingers. He glanced once more at Max, whose eyes bore only hope, never reproach. The man pressed pen to paper, drawing a decisive stroke that sealed their shared fate. The ink dried in a soft click of finality. The adoption agreement, now fully executed, lay complete before him. As he set the pen aside, a tide of relief washed through his chest, accompanied by an undercurrent of anticipation for the challenges ahead. He rose and pulled Max into a long embrace, feeling the dog's body quiver with contentment against his own. In that embrace, every uncertainty was eclipsed by an unspoken oath. They would navigate the storms together, anchored by trust and love. The man whispered into Max's fur, "This time, we're in it for good." And Max responded with a gentle nuzzle, as if endorsing every word. In the quiet aftermath of decision, the man felt both the tremor of risk and the radiance of possibility. The choice he had made carried the weight of their past and the promise of a future he would craft with care. In signing those papers, he had not only secured Max's place by his side but also reclaimed a piece of himself, a person capable of sacrifice, resilience, and unwavering devotion. As dawn approached beyond the windowpane, the man and his dog settled into a shared peace, ready to face whatever the next chapter would bring. Confronted with financial risk and the echoes of past mistakes, he signs the adoption papers at last, binding himself and Max in unshakable commitment heaven. As tomorrow's uncertainties loom, a soft glow of morning light filtered through the living room curtains as the man and Max settled into a new routine that felt as natural as breathing. After signing the final papers the night before, they had moved into a modest but permanent apartmenta, 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor with a small balcony overlooking a quiet courtyard. The man unpacked boxes while Max explored every corner, sniffing baseboards, inspecting corners, and finally choosing a plush dog bed he claimed as his own. Watching Max's cautious yet confident movements, the man felt a swell of pride and relief. The hurdles of bureaucracy, doubt, and displacement had given way to stability at last. Their mornings began with a gentle ritual. The man rolled out of bed before dawn, quietly dressed, and padded into the kitchen to prepare to bowls one of oatmeal and fresh fruit for himself. the other of nutritious kibble and warm water for Max. He set Max's bowl on a placemat near the door, and the dog nudged it gratefully before turning to the man with a soft look of contentment. As he ate, Max's tail thumped rhythmically against the floor, a metronome of gratitude that underscored every bite. In those shared breakfasts, the man recognized the embodiment of their journey's end, a simple routine forged from countless obstacles, now solidified into the cadence of daily life. Later, they ventured outside for their customary morning walk. The neighborhood park, once a tentative experiment in the first weeks after adoption, had become their haven. Max bounded ahead along the paved path, ears perked for the chirp of sparrows, the rustle of leaves, and the friendly greetings of fellow dogwalkers. The man followed at a comfortable pace, phone tucked away, absorbing the sights and sounds without anxiety. He no longer measured each footstep against a checklist of potential dangers. Instead, he allowed himself to savor the warmth of the sun, the cool breeze, and Max's joyous presence. Their bond had evolved from mutual rescue into a shared confidence that the world could be welcoming rather than hostile. Back at home, the man opened his laptop to join an online support group for new pet parents. He posted a photo of Max reclining on the balcony with the city skyline behind him, captioned, "Home isn't just a place, it's where you're never alone." Comments poured in from fellow adopters, offering advice on crate training for nights away, recommendations for the best groomers, and anecdotes of their own dog's quirks. In this network, the man found a community that understood the emotional stakes of adoption, the lingering echoes of guilt, the fear of failure, and the elation of watching a rescued animal thrive. He replied to each message with gratitude, realizing that their collective wisdom had guided him as much as any official policy or program. That afternoon, a soft knock came at the door. The shelter director stood in the hallway carrying a small bouquet of sunflowers. She smiled warmly as she stepped inside, embracing the man and then bending to greet Max. "I wanted to see how he's doing," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes. "I've been following your updates. He looks happy." The man guided her to the couch, and Max nestled between them, head resting on the director's lap. Watching them, the man felt the full circle of their journey crystallize, from the shelter's cautious watchfulness to this moment of celebration in his own home. The director admitted she'd doubted whether he could secure housing, yet here they were, thriving. He thanked her for her patience and for insisting on standards that had taught him responsibility, even as he acknowledged the tears her policies had drawn. Later, as dusk settled, the man prepared a video call with his employer abroad. He shared the news of his adoption, his stable living situation, and his plans to continue remote work. He spoke confidently, outlining how he would balance deadlines with dog care routines and occasional veterinary appointments. As he spoke, Max lay at his feet, ears flicking at the man's animated tone. When the call ended with his manager's enthusiastic approval, the man closed his laptop and exhaled deeply. The affirmation of his professional life dovetailed with his personal triumph, confirming that he could be both provider and companion. That evening, after Max's dinner and a final romp in the courtyard, the man lit a single candle on the coffee table. He sank into the couch, Max curled at his feet, and opened a leather-bound journal. He wrote an entry titled "Home at Last," recounting each milestone, the first hesitant walk in the new building, Max's playful greeting of the building superintendent, the director's surprise visit, and the warm welcome from his employer. As he wrote, tears of gratitude glistened in his eyes. He paused to stroke Max's ears, capturing the moment in his memory as surely as any photograph. In the gentle glow of the candle, he realized that resolution did not mean the absence of challenges. It meant possessing the resilience and love to face them. In the following days, he introduced Max to new experiences, sniffing blossoms in a community garden, meeting a therapy dog trainer, and trotting alongside him in a local 5K charity run. Each event deepened their connection, infusing their life with meaning beyond mere survival. Yet beneath the joy lay a firm foundation of trust forged through adversity. Nurtured in transitional housing, and affirmed in the very act of signing those papers, the man understood that their bond had become his guiding northern star, a reminder that hope, once realized, must be stewarded with care, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to the well-being of another soul. As Max curled into a contented sleep on his dog bed, the man stood by the balcony rail, gazing at the city lights that shimmered like distant promises. He reflected on how far they had come, from the shelter's concrete corridors to the warm embrace of community, from the ache of separation to the peace of togetherness. The journey had tested them at every turn through tears, doubt, and moments when giving up seemed easier than moving forward, but each challenge had honed their resilience and fortified their connection. Now, in the soft hush of night, the man whispered a final thought aloud. This is only the beginning. What do you hope will happen next in Max and his man's journey? Let us know in the comments below. Reunited under one roof, they transform instability into belonging yet as they embrace their hard-won home. The unfolding chapters of their bond promise new adventures and deeper devotion. The morning after Max's triumphant 5K charity run. The man sat quietly on the edge of their bed. Sunlight filtering through gauzy curtains and warming the room like a benediction. He watched Max stretch luxuriously on his new memory foam mat, his paws flexing in perfect contentment. In that moment of calm, the man allowed himself to survey the journey that had brought them here, from a terrified stray beside a busy highway to a cherished companion padding softly at his side. He remembered the late-night drive to the shelter, where he first laid eyes on Max's gaunt frame, the puppy's uncertain whimper, and the well-meaning lie he told himself that he would return for him once stabilization arrived. He recalled the hollow ache of eviction, the tear-streaked reenactment of that decision in her office, and the series of small, often painful steps toward the stability that now defined their lives. Each memory resonated not as a source of regret, but as a testament to the transformative power of persistence, compassion, and the willingness to atone for one's mistakes. Leaned against the headboard, the man reflected on the psychological terrain they had mapped together. Anxiety had once lurked in every unfamiliar corridor, his heart pounding as Max cowered in corners or trembled behind closed doors. Now, echoes of those old fears had given way to a quiet confidence. Max greeted the mail carrier with a hopeful nuzzle rather than defensive growl. The man planned weekend hikes without drafting contingency plans for worst-case scenarios. In therapy sessions and journal entries alike, he had confronted the guilt that had festered beneath his resolve, admitting how deeply he had hurt the creature who trusted him unconditionally. Through each confrontation, he learned that true redemption required more than a signature on adoption papers. It demanded daily acts of care, emotional honesty, and the humility to seek help when needed. He glanced at the framed photograph on the bedside table, the snapshot taken by that kindly volunteer, capturing Max's joyful tilt and his own teary smile at the moment of recognition. That image had become their talisman, proof that love can overcome distance, bureaucracy, and even one's own self-doubt. Yet beyond that image lay countless unseen frames. The fevered nights spent researching pet-friendly housing, the awkward conversations with landlords, the letter he had penned to his former landlord, not merely as a plea but as an apology for past instability. All these moments had conspired to forge a bond both profound and unbreakable. He realized that the most lasting gift he could offer Max was not material comfort but the unwavering promise of presence, to be there through sickness and health, triumph and hardship, until his last breath. Turning his gaze to Max, the man acknowledged the lessons he had learned from his canine companion, lessons that transcended species. Max's capacity for forgiveness had taught him that time alone does not heal wounds. Intentional acts of care do. The puppy's innate resilience had shown him that adversity need not define one's identity. It can refine character. And Max's boundless capacity for joy had reminded him that happiness often resides in the simplest moments. A cool breeze on a summer evening, the scent of grass after rain, the warmth of a faithful friend's nuzzle. In those lessons, the man found a mirror for his own growth and a guide for the life he aspired to lead. As noon approached, he rose to fill Max's water bowl and smile at the dog's eager approach. Each act pouring water, brushing fur, sharing a quiet pat felt sacramental. Imbued with the weight of their shared history, the man considered how their story might inspire others who stood at the crossroads of compassion and practicality. He imagined viewers watching their journey and realizing that adopting a pet is not merely an emotional impulse but a commitment requiring foresight, resourcefulness, and community engagement. He hoped they would see that when institutions set high standards, they do not seek to punish but to protect the vulnerable, both animal and human, and that perseverance in the face of red tape can lead to deeper personal transformation. Drawing a slow breath, the man envisioned speaking directly to the camera, urging prospective adopters to research housing policies, to establish support networks, and to view pet adoption as a partnership rather than a transaction. He would emphasize the importance of mental health resources for both owners and animals, how counseling, training classes, and peer support can ease the transition and mitigate trauma. He would encourage shelters to maintain compassionate yet firm guidelines, reminding staff that each applicant's struggle may mask profound dedication waiting to be nurtured. And he would call on communities to foster one another with empathy, recognizing that behind every adoption application lies a story of hope, fear, and the universal longing for belonging. In this vision, the man felt a surge of purpose. His journey with Max had yielded not only companionship but a blueprint for collective uplift. He saw himself volunteering at community workshops, sharing his story of heartbreak and redemption, and helping future adopters navigate the labyrinth of policies and personal limitations. He imagined penning articles for shelter newsletters, mentoring others through the bureaucratic maze, and supporting legislative efforts to expand pet-inclusive housing. Through such actions, he aspired to transform individual salvation into systemic change, ensuring that no pup would languish without a loving home due to gaps in resources or understanding. As the late afternoon sun cast elongated shadows across the floor, the man sank back onto the bed and allowed a gentle smile to bloom. He recalled the day Max had quivered beneath the park bench, believing himself doomed to invisibility. Now, the dog lounged at his feet, breathing softly, radiating trust. In the tapestry of memory, one thread ran through every scene: the unyielding hope that had brought them together and sustained them through every trial. That hope, he realized, was both gift and responsibility, a spark that glimmered brighter when shared. Rising once more, he fetched his journal and wrote a final entry. For this chapter, a message of hope addressed not only to himself but to every soul who doubted their capacity for change. He penned words to remind himself that second chances are not given lightly, they must be earned through empathy, perseverance, and the courage to confront one's own failings. He closed the journal, set it aside, and leaned down to kiss Max's forehead. The puppy stirred, lifting his head in affectionate recognition, as if to say, "This is exactly where we belong." Together, they stepped onto the balcony, the cityscape unfolding below like an intricate roadmap of human lives. In the stillness broken only by distant traffic and the flutter of pigeon wings, the man whispered, "Our story continues." And though the future remained unwritten, he carried within him the unshakable truth that love tempered by responsibility and guided by hope could transcend any barrier. As he stood there, hand in fur, he realized that their journey was not merely a tale of rescue but a testament to the transformative power of commitment, a reminder that, in the end, hope is more than a feeling. It is a way of life. In quiet reflection, he honors the scars and triumphs that forged their past regrets into a guiding hope that promises redemption and new beginnings. In a crowded city shelter, a trembling German Shepherd pup presses his paws against the chain-link barrier, eyes brimming with silent questions. He's never forgotten the gentle hands that first freed him from starvation's grip, nor the warm voice that whispered promises of safety. Today, as footsteps echo down the corridor, his ears perk up and his tail gives a hesitant thump, a spark of recognition in the haze of his new reality. Yet, beyond that threshold lies a truth neither of them can escape. The man before him carries a burden so heavy that it might sever their bond forever, leaving only echoes of hope in an empty kennel. Before we continue, where are you watching from today? Comment below. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow on rows of metal cages that lined the shelter's concrete floor. A faint mixture of cleaning solution and antiseptic drifted through the air, underscoring the quiet urgency that pulsed in every corner. Volunteers moved with practiced efficiency, dispensing food, administering vaccines, cataloging new arrivals. Yet, in this sea of routine, one newcomer stood out. A lean, anxious German Shepherd puppy, whose soulful amber eyes traced every movement, as if searching for something beyond the confines of his temporary prison. He had arrived just hours earlier. A stray collapsed at the edge of a busy highway. Paramedics had wrapped him in a blanket, his ribs visible through matted fur, and delivered him to the shelter staff with urgent pleas for rescue. Through his haze of pain and hunger, the puppy had clung to the one word whispered by the caring attendant: safe. That single syllable was enough to still the thunder of his heart, to coax him into trusting that anyone would not betray him again. Inside the office, paper forms fluttered against clipboards as the intake volunteer entered his age, gender, and medical status into the database. She noted his battle scars, an old gash near his shoulder, likely from a stray animal, and bruises along his flank where he must have lain too long without relief. Yet despite the evidence of suffering, his eyes shone with intelligence and resilience. "Keep an eye on him," she murmured to the vet tech. "He's more than just another case. There's a story here." Across the room, the man appeared almost hesitant to step inside, his coat, once crisp, hung a little loose at the shoulders. His eyes, once bright with purpose, seemed dimmed by months of uncertainty. He lingered at the doorway, hands buried in his pockets, as if unsure whether he belonged in this place of second chances and fresh beginnings. To anyone else, he was just another visitor, perhaps a potential adopter or a well-meaning volunteer. But to the German Shepherd puppy huddled 3 rows down, he was something far more profound, a ghost from the past, a memory half-dream, yet impossible to shake. When the man finally crossed the threshold, his gaze swept the cages with a mixture of hope and dread. Each dog he passed wagged a cautious greeting, tongues lolling, tails fluttering. Yet none stirred the familiar flicker in his chest until he rounded the corner and froze before the puppy's enclosure. Time slowed. The sterile hum of fluorescent lights faded, replaced by the pounding of 2 hearts, 1 dog's. One man's reuniting after months of separation. The puppy, alert now, rose to his paws. His tail quivered once, twice, then began a tremulous wag. His ears, which had drooped in fear only moments before, perked forward in impossibly precise recognition. His lips trembled as if he remembered every moment of kindness that man had shown him. He let out a low whimper, a barely audible plea that echoed in the hollow of the kennel. And then his eyes glistened, as if tears had formed there. Morning. The distance time had imposed upon their bond. In that suspended beat, memories flooded them both. The man saw the frightened stray cowering beneath a park bench, the lines of his own hand as he offered scraps of sandwich from his lunchbox. The cautious sniff that became a nuzzle of trust. He heard the frantic heartbeat of the puppy pressed against his chest as he carried him back to the shelter van. The soft whine when a stranger's hand came too close, and the gentle reassurance he had offered in a voice choked by emotion. "It's okay, boy, you're safe now." And the puppy remembered. He remembered every pat on the head, every whispered promise, every tear the man had shed when he realized he could no longer keep a pet in the apartment whose rent had just doubled. He remembered the final hug before returning him a word that tasted like betrayal and the emptiness that followed. Now, years later, their eyes met across cold metal and concrete, and the flicker of hope surged anew, only to be shadowed by the question neither dared to speak: what has become of us since we last met? The shelter's hush deepened as onlookers sensed the gravity of the reunion. Volunteers paused in their tasks. Staff exchanged glances thick with empathy. It was as if the building itself held its breath. For the puppy and the man, the world beyond these walls ceased to exist. In that moment, they were bound by a connection that transcended time, circumstance, and even the unkind separation that had defined their shared history. Yet something lingered at the edge of the man's gaze, an unspoken sorrow that tempered his joy, though he longed to reach through the bars, to scoop the puppy into his arms once more. His shoulders sagged under the weight of unspoken responsibilities. He traced the outline of the pup's muzzle with his eyes, committing every detail to memory: the small white patch on his chest, the slight quiver of his whiskers, the way his coat caught the light. But as the puppy whimpered and pressed against the barrier, the man's jaw clenched. He looked away, swallowing hard, as if steeling himself against a pain that threatened to overtake him. Silence returned to the shelter, carrying with it the promise of reunion and the tremor of something darker. The man's reasons for leaving, once rationalized as necessity, now felt like hollow excuses in the gaze of the creature who had trusted him implicitly. And the puppy, torn between elation and confusion, tilted his head, sensing that this encounter carried more than just the thrill of recognition. It bore the weight of loss, of questions unanswered, of a bond stretched across the chasm of impossible choices. In the hush, a single resolution formed between them: neither would turn away. Whatever lay ahead, whatever truth the man harbored, or decision he must make, the puppy would stand by his side, waiting for the hand that had saved him once before. And the man, despite the ache in his chest, would face the consequences of their reunion, no matter how painful. In a lonely shelter, a reunited duo teeters between hope and heartbreak, each recognizing the other's scars and both bracing for the choice that will determine their future. A thin shaft of dawnlight slanted across the cramped apartment as he fastened the last button of his worn coat. His reflection in the mirror, a man once brimming with confidence, now looked hollowed by months of restless nights and endless worry. His breath caught as he pinned a faded photograph of a German Shepherd puppy to the lapel, the image creased and frayed at the edges. He stared at it for a moment, feeling the familiar warmth of that day pulse in his chest. Then, with a quiet resolve, he slipped the photo into his pocket and stepped out into the chill of early morning. Each footstep echoing the promise he had made to come back, no matter the cost. On the ride to the airport, the city blurred past in streaks of neon and asphalt. He rehearsed the words he would say, over and over, "I've come back for you." Yet each repetition felt inadequate, as if no string of syllables could bridge the gap that had grown between them. In his mind's eye, he saw the puppy trembling, under the park bench, the same bench where he knelt and extended a trembling hand. He remembered the animal's muzzle brushing his palm in cautious trust, the anxious whine that turned into a tentative wag. That moment had lit a spark of hope in both their hearts, a hope that, despite everything, had never truly died. But life had its own designs. When his landlord delivered the eviction notice, the words seemed to mock his loyalty to a creature he loved more than his own comfort. He had searched for alternative housing, scraped together savings, and begged friends for help. Yet each time, the cost of living rose faster than his salary abroad, forcing him into a corner of impossible choices. He swallowed his guilt and returned the puppy to the shelter, promising a reunion once he was settled. At the time, it had seemed the rational thing to do. Now, in the gathering light, it felt like a betrayal he vowed to atone for. On the long flight overseas, he clutched the photograph through turbulence and refilled coffee cups. He imagined the puppy's growth, his sturdy legs, sleek coat. Curious, Izan scolded himself for every day he had missed. The first meal, shared in a warm kitchen. The midnight cuddle for warmth. The quiet companionship when loneliness gnawed at his spirit. He pictured the shelter staff caring for him, offering comfort with gentle hands and soft words. Deep down, he feared the puppy had forgotten him, but he needed to believe that the bond they forged could survive time and distance. As the plane touched down, his phone buzzed relentlessly. The messages were routine updates from his employer abroad, new assignments, revised schedules. He ignored them, stepping through the terminal with determination outweighing fatigue. Each passing announcement gate, 12, baggage claims seemed to echo the puppy's earlier cries for recognition. He had learned that hope could be both sustenance and burden, and now he carried it like a fragile ember against the cold weight of possibility. Outside the shelter, the pavement was slick with last night's rain. He paused at the entrance, inhaling the crisp air tinged with antiseptic and damp concrete. His heart pounded as he touched the metal bar of the gate, tracing its ridges like the grooves on the photo in his pocket. The sign above the door read City Animal Rescue, each letter a reminder of the life he had altered. He pressed his palm against the wall, closing his eyes to summon the courage he had summoned when he first rescued that trembling puppy. In that instant, he felt both predator and protector. Predator, for the guilt that hunted him. Protector, for the vow he intended to keep. Inside, the shelter was a microcosm of hope and heartbreak. Volunteers moved with quiet purpose, cleaning cages, recording data, whispering comforting words to anxious animals. He paused to watch a tabby cat stretch luxuriously in a sunbeam. The mundane peace of the moment, sharpening his awareness of his mission. When he asked a volunteer for the kennel number, his voice wavered, betraying the weight of months spent suppressing emotion. She met his gaze with gentle compassion and led him down the corridor, past rows of barking and howling, until they stood before a blue metal door. Silence settled over him as the volunteer unlocked the latch and stepped aside. The man's breath hitched when he saw the puppy, no longer the fragile stray, but a confident young dog with alert ears and bright eyes. His coat, now glossy and well-groomed, rippled as he stood at attention. Recognition dawned slowly, the tilt of the head, the subtle lift of the lip in a half-smile, the quiver of the tail pressing against the floor. In that heartbeat, every barrier between past and present dissolved. Yet the man's heart constricted, as he realized how much had changed and how much remained beyond his control. He crouched low, extending a trembling hand through the bars. The puppy's nostrils flared as he took in the familiar scent. Leather boots, worn denim, a hint of cologne mixed with the temps of the city. The dog's body trembled as he leaned forward, pressing his snout against the man's palm. Memories flooded them both, the frightened whimper under the park bench, the rush to the shelter van, the whispered lullaby of reassurance in the night. Tears stung the man's eyes as he whispered, "I'm here, I promised." The puppy's eyes glistened, reflecting the raw ache of months apart. Around them, the shelter continued its steady rhythm, footsteps, distant barks, the soft murmur of voices. But for the man and the puppy, time had contracted to this single moment of reconnection. He traced the ridges of the puppy's muzzle, committing every contour to memory. Yet beneath the joy lay a current of fear, feared that his circumstances had shifted irreversibly, feared that the shelter's walls might stand between them once more. He closed his eyes, anchoring himself to the present, vowing silently that he would find a way to bring the puppy home. The volunteer stood respectfully to the side, giving them space while her eyes glistened with